There we go.
Lovely. We're ready.
So, welcome everyone. My name's Beck. I am from the city of Stonington. I'm going to start off tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we are meeting. For Stonington, that's the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to their elders, past and present, as well as extending that respect to any Indigenous people who might be joining us tonight. And we acknowledge the living connection to country, relationship with the land, and all living things extending back thousands of years for all Indigenous people, and acknowledge they were the first people to care for country. Uh,
Thank
so,
you.
th- Thank you
Mm.
so much for participating in tonight's webinar on apartment habitat gardens. It's a part of the My Smart Garden program. If you haven't heard of us before, it's a collaborative program between 11 Metro Melbourne councils. We extend down to I was going to say Bellarine Peninsula, the Mornington Peninsula as well now, which is really exciting. We aim to help residents grow our own food, support local wildlife, increase resilience in a changing climate, reduce waste and water use. A little bit of housekeeping. Please keep yourself on mute during the presentation, but we love questions, so feel free to enter them into the chat box and we will raise them as we go through the presentation tonight. We're recording, so you'll be able to watch it back later on the My Smart Garden website. Don't be too worried about if you miss anything. Yeah, we'll have access to it later on. And now I would like to introduce you to our facilitator for tonight, Emmaline Bowman. Em is a landscape designer. She is the director and founder of STEM Landscape Architecture and Design. She also was the winner of the Best in Show at last year's Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show. So if you went along and saw that, hopefully you popped by Em's design feature. And she's also extremely passionate about native and Indigenous plants and how they can support our local wildlife. So Em, I'll pass it
Oh,
over to you.
thank you for such a nice introduction, Pia. And
No worries.
yeah, thank you very, very much. I guess we'll get straight into it. Like Beck said, if there are some questions, put it in the chat. If they're really important, put your hand up maybe. But otherwise, we can sort of leave it to the end and talk, you know, talk through it. I tend to talk a fair bit, so we'll try and get through the whole presentation. And usually, if there are some questions that come up, I'll let you know if we're going to be covering that later. But yeah, I think just sit tight and see what we're going to say. I am very excited to present this. Obviously, Becca's just said, very passionate about native plants and wildlife. And yeah, I find that no matter what the space or what size it is, there's always something we can do. So this one is particularly more surrounded around about of like smaller gardens, balconies and small gardens. So there'll be just ways that you can do little things to improve your space to be able to, bring in some sort of biodiversity, no matter what it is. So I'm just going to get started. So yeah, STEM, we created STEM because I did see that there was a bit of a lapse in the industry about creating spaces for wildlife. I tended to privilege the wildlife before the people, but so I really wanted to create this company to celebrate the diverse Australian species that we have, and in a way that starts to encourage local biodiversity and connecting people to our spaces, and yeah, making us really excited and passionate about our native plants and maybe even discovering more. So that is what STEM's all about. We're going to cover a few little things tonight. So, threats to our wildlife, how we can support them in different ways, some different plants that you could use. And then the types of gardens that we're going to cover are going to be balconies and small gardens and courtyards. And then just look at some ways you can make some little homes at home for critters, and just a few resources that you probably already have, but just a few that I always sort of encourage people to read, as I find them to be very helpful, and a lot of people get a lot out of them as well. So when we work, we always work with a holistic design approach, meaning that we're thinking about everything within spaces. So again, no matter what size your space is, it's not just about the plants and, you know, maybe it's birds that you want to encourage. It's really about the whole biome. So from, if you want to incorporate animals, it's thinking about the lizards and the insects and the amphibians and the mammals, the fungi and the soils. So whenever we approach anything, it really is coming down to that broad cycle of holisticness that's what makes a space really thriving. When we think about native species, so when I was doing my master's, I did an investigation into the adaptive species around Melbourne. And there's a thing there is this thing with urban environments that a lot of our native species have learnt to adapt within our urban environments. And we've also got exotic species as well. And part of my research assignment was that if we start to introduce back some of those native plant species or change the hierarchy away from privileging exotic species, then you start to change the hierarchy of what animals start to want to, you know, be encouraged into your space. So by bringing in those indigenous plants, you're bringing in all those pollinating insects rather than privileging more of the honeybees. And, you know, with bird species, rather than having pigeons and sparrows, you might start to bring in more lorikeets and miners and weebills and things like that. So really, it's incredible to see how these species have learnt to adapt with humans. And the reality is, especially in urban spaces, that, you know, we are losing a lot of that biodiversity because of the way that we're planning. So if we can just help them out a little bit, we can start to encourage more back. And that's what this is all about. This is just a breakdown of those things. So as you can see, you know, we all know what those exotic species are, and we can definitely change it. We all know what our threats to our wildlife are, from urban sprawl to pollution, and the trashing of our waterways. So if we can all just work together as a, you know, public, we can change those things. Other threats to our wildlife obviously are our pets, but then we also have invasive species that we should be controlling and monitoring, like the Indian myna, and, you know, even in our fish in our waterways, we tend to think they're tadpoles, but they're actually a mosquito fish, Gambusia, which is a really horrible little fish that's destroying so much. So, you know, when we're thinking about introducing like ponds and things, look into native fish and things like that. And don't ever flush your goldfish down the drain or let them go in the creek or whatever, because I have heard it before. They didn't want to kill Goldie, so they released it in the waterway. This is how those things happen. When we think about pets and our wildlife, we all love our pets. You know, I have a pet cat, which everyone thinks, oh my goodness, Em has a pet cat. She is an indoor cat, but she has gotten out at one stage and she ate a frog once, and I'll never forget it. And I was very angry at her. So it does happen. I have also seen in parks dogs going off leash, and I saw one kill a water chook. So there's a lot of emphasis on hating cats, but dogs are just as bad. So, you know, there's all these things, obviously, to desex your animal. I think I'm preaching to the converted, but there's a lot of myths as well, especially around cats. Bells do not stop cats from killing. They have learnt to, you know, mute that bell noise. And even in the daytime, people let their, you know, cat out, especially, they can still hunt in the day. So really, these animals should be sort of kept indoor. Dogs are on leash unless they're in their dog park. Unfortunately, they are there and they are hunting animals. So yeah, and I guess, yeah, it's good that we do have those cat curfews and things like that. Other things that we can do to protect our wildlife is to have water dishes and any water bowls sort of above the ground, because if they are on the ground, they can be predated on by pets, but it can also be other animals as well. So we usually encourage bowls to be above the ground so they can bathe or drink. To combat the Indian miner, we always suggest putting baffles on the boxes because that prevents them from getting in. Indian miners are horrible birds. They go in, they peck and destroy the eggs of our native birds to pretty much get rid of any competition. They also pass baby chicks through the holes to their mates, which they drop them out of the sky. And they also peck and bully the mother and father birds as they're laying on their nest. So they basically are trying to just get rid of any competition and obliterate them. So the only way to really stop them is putting baffles. It is upsetting that this has happened because it does mean that even the baffle size means that you're privileging certain species that can use it, which is why there is like a big push to try and eliminate a lot of these birds. And I understand like some people don't want animals to be hurt, but there are reasons why these birds have really damaged our local wildlife. They also attack a lot of mammal species as well. And obviously too, like thinking again holistically about what our boxes do, we need to make sure that when we situate our boxes, keeping them away from western sun to make sure they don't heat up in the hot sun. Okay, so attracting local species to your area. Again, it's a holistic approach. So I know we're going to be talking about smaller spaces, but there's always a way that you can try to encourage different types of animals from birds. And when we're thinking about birds, there's different categories of what they are, from insectivores, granivores, nectivores, and frugivores, meaning like they eat insects, they eat meat, they eat grains, or they eat fruit. We also need to think about frogs and insects, and you'd be very surprised that we'll have many frog species that would be encouraged into your backyard. Usually the clawed species of frogs, which is things like your hobblebonk frog, your common froglets, striped marsh frogs, those sort of species from the Limnaceae family or the Crinia family, they will be able to live in your backyard if it's moist enough. Probably not so much your tree frogs like Litorias, but you'd be very surprised. So another thing that I really like to stress is to observe your local wildlife and what's in the area, because if you start to observe, then you start to think about, what is in my space or what is missing. And what we usually encourage is to find out what was in your local area before, if you looked at your environmental condition, and you can actually start to see what species weren't there before and what you can do to encourage them by introducing certain plants. So we're a big, we sort of say, go to your local park and see what's there. Look at what insects, see what birds, see what those sort of things are. And then that is where you can start to bring in something into your garden that starts to bring them in. With your local wildlife, I'm going to go through some of the species just here in Melbourne. I'm guessing that most people here are from Melbourne area. So when we think of that, we're thinking of different bird species like lorikeets, which we have here. We've got New Holland honeyeaters, mudlarks, red-browed finch, red wattlebirds, silver eyes, eastern spinebills, musk lorikeets, and spotted pardalotes are just some of the birds that you've probably even observed here in Melbourne. For insect species, we have butterfly species like jezebels, painted ladies, the mantids. We've got hoverflies and wasps and skippers. So, there's a variety of different species here as well. And a lot of what we don't remember too is that moth species actually make up for a lot of our pollinating insects too at night. We just don't observe them, so we don't think about them too much. Your frog species as well. These are 6 species that you'll easily find within Melbourne, from your striped and spotted marsh frogs, your pobblebonks, eastern brown tree frogs, common froglets, and I've just sort of shown that like your spotted and striped marsh frogs have lots of different variations, so they're all here too. For your reptiles, We have water skinks, delicate skinks. Yes, we have tiger snakes. They live here as well. Different types of weasel skinks and our blue tongue. So these are also species that are around our parks and gardens. And mammals, we all know our possums, even though I know some of them can be a little bit annoying when they eat your veggies, but they are still part of habitat. And ones that I really love are things like microbats, because, you know, they're a fantastic little critter that keep your mossies down and things like that. In our parklands, we still have spottings of echidnas, but sadly we have lost, you know, a lot of the brush-tailed phascogales and antechinus. I think the last spotting of a brush-tailed phascogale was in the 1970s on the Mary Creek. So one day I hope we hear that those can come back, because they are pretty cool little critters. So when we think about habitats, we've got to think of a variety of habitats and, you know, what we can do to support these animals. So we always suggest, and I know that this is for smaller gardens, but there is always ways you can incorporate some of these features into your garden. So, you know, having some sort of water source. If you have a little lawn, try and think about native grasses and things for your granivore eating birds, even mammals. A shrub layer mixed with grasses and trees, bird boxes, a mixture of flowering plants and fruiting plants and nectar producing plants. So, you know, we're thinking about a variety of different things to support those different animals. Water is obviously the most important feature in most gardens, and it's amazing what you can encourage if you bring a little bit of water. It draws in a whole range of different wildlife, not only just for drinking, but for bathing as well. And when we're thinking about it in a larger context, I'm always banging on about water and, you know, waterways, to make sure that we're thinking that, you know, if we can restore our waterways and replant, then we're creating these corridor and links back into, like, you know, areas that have been destroyed. But you're also providing a shelter and resource for plants, for animals in your backyard as well, especially during times of drought or in those really hot climates. And now that we are going into a period of time where it does get really hot and we've got all climate change, then water becomes even more scarce. So it's really important that we're thinking about, you know, ways in which we can actually hold water and provide this to wildlife. I'll kind of skip through this. Another thing, and I'm sorry I haven't gone straight into all the balconies because it's just a bit of context that I'm giving at the moment. So another thing is, yeah, we all need to eat. And I touched on before about all the different bird species and you know what they require from the granivores, insectivores, frugivores. So this is where we start talking about a variety of different plants that support this wildlife. And obviously this is recorded, so then you can remember the names of all these. But yeah, so a nectarivore relies on nectar. So lorikeets, possums, wattlebirds, and honey eaters sort of come under that category. Frugivores are things like our fruit bats, and they will eat things like dianella berries and, you know, obviously our fruit trees as well. Insectivores are things that obviously feed on insects, so your lizards and frogs, small mammals, birds, and arachnids. And you have to remember too that when you start to introduce insects into your garden, then you start to get, like, just see that range of different species that will come into your garden. And granivores are the species that obviously will eat grains. So that's where all your grasses and things come into play. And that's where, you know, when you see lawns and ovals and things like that, you'll see a range of different types of parrots and corellas and any types of cockatoo like birds there feeding off those sort of things. Doubled up there. Native grasses, again, like, they are really a fantastic plant. And I know some people are a little bit funny about grasses, but here are some species that still can be really ornamental and beautiful in your garden and even your pots on your balcony. And those species are like Polar berryeidae, Semeter triandra, Microlina scapoides, which is your wallaby grasses, your kangaroo grasses. Poa is just poa. And these species are, like I said before, can be really a beautiful feature in a pot at home. And, you know, the really nice stories about like Semeter is that a lot of, because it's kangaroo grass, not only do they like to eat it, but there is this thing where when kangaroos are jumping through the environment, the depression that their paw leaves in the ground actually allows the seed to fall into that depression. And their urine stimulates the germination of that plant as well. So, you know, there's all these really lovely connections to these grasses. Fruiting plants that you can include plants like Dianella, Incalena tomistata, which is like a ruby saltbush. Ostromyrtus is, I think, midgeonberry, I think the common name is. And the solanums are your kangaroo apples. They are great plants to bring in for wildlife. Leaf litter is also really, really important to have around your garden as well, because it starts to bring in this microbiome and introduces isopod species of insects, which helps break down that litter, but also increase that microbiome and fungi, which help support your plants. And when that does happen, you start to get a whole lot of insects, which allows a lot of birds to come in and start feeding from that as well. Someone's just asked about which plants would survive in pots. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Indigenous and native, I'm sure everyone understands this, but I always bring up this topic. So Indigenous means that it's localized to that area that you reside in. And then native means broader context, like could be from Western Australia. You tend to have species of plants, like say the chocolate lily, for example. Chocolate lilies can be found all over Victoria, but you do find that there is a slight variation to all these different species. So if you do live in Bundoora, say, you probably want to try and find an Indigenous nursery that has that species of chocolate lily. There are slight changes to all these plants, which are adaptations to certain insect species or whatever. So, you know, we actually had, for example, with the chocolate lilies, we had about 500 species that we had collected around Melbourne, and it was interesting because they were all so different, from color to the ridges on their fringes, to the size of their leaves, to the tuber. So there is so much difference depending where it is. A really good thing about using Indigenous plants is that, again, you are supporting these local species that heavily rely on them. And in some cases, some species can even be extinct because that particular plant has gone. It's a conservation effort if you can have Indigenous plants. And not only that, you're supporting Indigenous nurseries where the people who work in these areas are the most amazing people. They are, you know, they're basically doing it for free. They're incredibly passionate. Their knowledge outweighs so many more other people. And at the end of the day, yeah, it's literally saving a lot of the biodiversity. So go into your Indigenous nursery and see what amazing plants that you can find there. Native plants, as I said before, is more like, it could be broad. It could be other parts of Victoria, or it could be all around Australia. But I'm really excited about native plants because, you know, we're seeing a change in what's coming in. We're getting more varieties that we've never seen before. We can sort of substitute exotic plants out for a native species that can almost act exactly the same way and also look the same, maybe even better. But we do, and also as a conservation effort, like there's a lot of plant species that we do have in our gardens, just like we all know the Wallamai pines and things like that. Even our silver princesses, those plants are actually critically endangered in the environment. So when you have them in your garden, you're actually got a bit of a bank, because if anything happens in these other environments, they're gone. But now we know that we actually have a bank of these plants that could almost be restored back into these areas. We also need to remember that native plants can also become weedy. So it is really good to do a little bit of a checkup on what plants you are buying sometimes. And yeah, everything's sort of within limitations. And we all know exotic plants, they're found outside of Australia. They can still be fantastic plants for habitat and for hardiness. Some can become extremely weedy. There's a few species I wish I never saw in nurseries ever again. But there is that thing that we spoke about before about hierarchy and supporting native species. So sometimes when you start to bring in too many exotic species, you start to support exotic species of animals as well. So I always come under that notion of just being responsible in what you're choosing to pop into your garden. So some plants around Melbourne area that I really encourage people to use, and this is sort of going on that whole thread of, different things that support different types of animals. So Indigofera australis is a really lovely native shrub, small tree that's flowering right now. It's a fantastic plant, and you can put that in your pot, or you can put that in your small garden as well. The Themata triandra, which is your kangaroo grass, is a really lovely tussock grass, and you can buy varieties now with blue foliage, and they can be as beautiful as things like miscanthus, which everyone seems to love, which is an exotic grass. For a small tree, which can be a big tree, pretty slow growing, but Betharia spinulosa is like an insect hub when it's in flower. If you have a productive garden or anything like that, this plant is like bonkers for insects and pollinators. And we all know the different types of Dianella, that the fruit itself is edible, so a lot of birds tend to feed off that. Other species are things like Albanxias, which we all know, Integrifolia, which is a local, different types of callistemons, so your bottle brush for your nectivorous birds. Both Banksias and callistemons support the nectivorous. They also support insect species as well, because they come in and then you get your your insectivorous animals feeding off the insects that are attracted to that too. Chrysophyllum apiculatum is a really good indigenous plant. It supports a lot of insect species, but also supports skinks. And it's a really lovely ground cover that can also be used in pots. And Carbobrotus rossii, in the really harsh environments on your balcony, it's a really good succulent native that you can use that helps with skinks and insects and all those sort of things as well. These indigenous plants obviously are just a few that support your local wildlife and can be easily incorporated into a normal little garden planting. Sorry. Okay, now I'm going to start to go into balconies and small gardens. So balconies are just obviously small space. I don't really need to get into that. But when we're dealing with balcony gardens, I tend to find that they're pretty exposed environments, and they can be in really, really harsh conditions, or they can be completely in deep shade. So I always recommend, especially in harsh conditions, that you use wicking garden beds for these applications. And the reason is because you can obviously retain a moisture level, and the plants can feed off that during those hotter climates. We haven't had any issue when we bring in a wicking system. And for any harsh environment, we always try and get it that there's a water reservoir within the pot. Like I said, balconies can be hot and windy, so the choice of plants is really important. Obviously here you can see that we've done a little bit of a mixture of native and exotic. It was sort of sometimes you get a brief from the client of what they want. But here we've got things like Coria, Autoxanthus, Brachyscome, and in there is like Crowias and things like that. But even in the top, this is in Docklands, it is so hot, it is so windy, it is such a harsh environment, but this, because of the wicking system, is growing absolutely fine. You can see the vine hasn't taken too well because it's just so harsh, but in all, it's actually doing really well, and it's helped reduce the heat. And she's noticed things coming in here. It is literally the top story in terrible old dingy Docklands. I'm sorry if anyone's living there, but it's like such a harsh spot. But you know, she's had bees come in. She's had little tiny spiders, different types of insects that she's found, and you know, it's just uplifted the space. You know, for her. We planted species like woolly bush, the Adenanthus, a fantastic plant in pots. It's got a very shallow root system, which makes it really ideal for those locations. Crowias, which is this really pretty plant with the pink flowers. Banksias, they do a bit better in pots because of the free draining soil. So sometimes they can be a little bit fickle in your garden beds. And there's Brachyscome and Felicia that we also use within these beds. And, you know, in this application, you can get a whole lot of pollinators that come in. Another exposed balcony, we always find that when we're dealing with certain plants, we deal with plants that really enjoy like free draining soil. So in this picture here, we use things like Dampera and Lamandra and kangaroo paws and things like that, because they tend to like the warmth and the free draining soil, and you know, those really exposed environments. Other species we do use is salvia as an exotic species. So a lot of people kind of say, oh, Em, you're so purist. I am not. I just really check what plants are really suitable for certain areas and what's not going to be an issue. So salvia is a really nice plant for balconies because it sort of merges in, because most people have veggies on their balcony as well. So salvia is a really good one to encourage a lot of pollinator species into the garden. But in this picture, you can see Dampera is a fantastic plant if you can visit your nurseries for this one. Karanga is a really great nursery to check. Dampera, there's a species called Dampera stricta that's here in Victoria that's really good. But what we find is they love the edge of your planter beds because they like the warmth, and they're a really lovely spilling plant for those applications. There's just a few more pictures of, you know, this, you know, the balcony, and there's Max. But yeah, it's nice. There's a few other pictures. This is sort of a little bit after it was planted. So here we've got bulbine lilies, the Dampieras. Don't be afraid of using like small trees. Obviously, with planters, a lot of people sort of, you know, they come and they say, you know, will this be long term? The thing is with planters and pots is there's only so much soil that can last. So, you know, plants do exhaust the soil after time. So when we choose our plants, we do try and choose shallow rooted species. So the things like the Damperas are really great. But then, you know, if you want a little bit of height and tree, we look into certain plant species that can tolerate shallower soils. So that's why we kind of look at different types of mallees, eucalypts. Here we've got the baby blue because you can like cut it and coppice it and, you know, get the sprays. But there is a limit with planters that the soil can get exhausted and you just get this big root mass. So, you know, it's sort of like it could be 2, it could be 5, you could even get 10 years out of a planter. But please know that it's a finite resource, the soil that's left in that bed, which is again why we go with shallow rooted plant species. So what creatures would you encourage to your balcony? Your biggest audience is insects usually. So you probably won't be getting, you know, all your honey eaters and things like that, but you know, insects are the big thing. And we have seen on many of these balconies, butterflies like the painted ladies, definitely getting different types of you know, bees. And obviously, yes, the European honeybee. We have had blue-banded bees more on the lower apartment side. It seems like they don't go that high. And we get a whole lot of spider species that come through as well. So there are all those there are little criterias of like, if it is too high, you're obviously limiting that exposure, but the higher it is, you tend to get more spiders, which is really interesting. And they're eating a lot of like the little gnats that come out of your soil and things like that. So before talking about observation, it's so important that people just observe, because this becomes part of that data bank of understanding, what we can do and what these species adapt to in our urban environments, which is what I really find so fascinating. And I guess, yeah, the more plants we trial, the more we see, don't we? So pollinators, obviously, we know that they're really important, but over 80% of the world's flowering plants are needed by pollinators to reproduce. And in Australia itself, there are over 2,000 species of native bees here. So, when we're creating these pollinator gardens, we can obviously see how important they are. And no matter what the space, especially balconies, it's like that's your prime audience. So let's think that's what we can try and encourage. Other species that you can encourage on your balcony and that we've seen is we have seen an eastern spinebill go in. The balcony was a little bit bigger and it was lower plant, like lower situated. So we've had them. We've had ladybugs. I don't know if anyone has seen, like, your marbled gecko is a really like, this little gecko has really adapted into urban environments, so they can live in your letterbox. They live behind our vertical wall gardens. They tend to love those areas the most, and obviously spiders. But yeah. So simple things you can do for your balcony garden is, like I said before, thinking about the planters that you use, make sure they're wicking, or make sure they're big enough to hold enough soil volume to support these plants for a longer time. Water bowls for birds to drink. I also find that water bowls are really good to have, especially in exposed areas, because you're actually bringing in a little bit of humidity and water circulation in the air as well, which helps your plants in that area. It also creates a bit of a thermal mass. So in summer, it stays a little bit cooler underneath, provides moisture. In the winter, it makes it a little bit warmer for those exposed sites. And the same application goes in your garden. With bird baths, remember to keep them off the ground, but I guess on a balcony, if you don't have a cat, they can be on the ground as well. And another thing, obviously, because you're introducing a lot of insect species, think about bug hotels. If you've got mud wasps and resin bees and things like that, and then you can situate a pollinator garden there in your close proximity, bug hotels are really good. They can also just be Spiderland. I know some of you might not like spiders, but spiders are good, and they're here for something. And if you look at the little peacocks, the guard spiders, which everyone loves, they are really sweet. These are the plants that I had shown in those pictures before, which are great for balconies. So for grasses, we like putting little tufts of the Diclonacne crenata. Plume grass is the common name. It's just got that really lovely little feathery head, and it only gets about 30-40 centimeters. It can seed really easily. So if you ever see little babies and you want to sort of maintain it, just pluck it out. Correas do really well. We've got so many different species of correas now, really little ones. So put correas in, and that can help get some nectar-eating birds. Orthoxanthus is one of our favorites. It looks just like a lamandra, but you get these beautiful iris-like flowers pretty much now in spring. It's called morning iris because the flowers open up in the morning and then they're all finished by the end of the day. So that's a really lovely grass to use. Chrysocephalum, so great in planters as well. Again, free draining soil, shallow roots, they do really good. Scabola, really great plant as well. And Wallenbergia, native bluebells. We find that they do, they also like to be planted around rocks. So if they're planted at the edge of your planter, they'll also do well because they're getting the warmth from the wall. So there is something going on with moisture and warmth for these species. So it's kind of nice to observe. Whoops, sorry. How do I do that? Other plants great for balconies are Dampiera that I said before. That's the one that's trailing and hanging off the edge. Really, really lovely plant. Again, you get it from Karanga. So Lamandras are really good. Brachyscome, which is your native daisy, really good for pollinators. The chocolate lilies, as I said before, Althopodium, they have a little tuber, so they will go dormant in winter, but then you get these beautiful little lilies that come up pretty much now all into summer. Kangaroo paws are really good in planters. I have a thing with kangaroo paws. Always get a flavidus, a variety, which is the tall one. The small ones don't live. So a lot of you probably already had the little ones. They don't live that long. So if you're having a little one, think of it more like an annual. Yeah, I would go the big tall ones, and they will always be a big showpiece. Baronias are also really, really good. And I know a lot of you probably be like, oh no, they always die. The ones that smell beautiful will die. The ones that don't, and the smell or the scent is in the leaves, are extremely hardy. So go to Karanga and buy. I always say Karanga because it's like the best place to go for all these native things, but that is the place to go. They'll have Baronia species, and they are so beautiful in pots. They do so well, and people won't even think it's native because it's just, yeah, people tend to have a bit funny thing with native sometimes. Another one, I've had Eremophila hygrophana. This is that plant in the bottom right corner. It is such a great plant in a pot. Again, small root system. I've had mine for 5 years and it flowers every time. I just trim it back and it looks good. If I forget to water it, it just looks so good. I don't think anyone's asked me questions. No. So now I'm going more into small gardens and what we can do here. So this is a little garden just in Northcote, and we always find that most people sort of want something where they can have a garden. They don't have that much space, but you know, we kind of think about, you know, they still want to have veggies, but how do we still make it really beautiful? So we create these little raised garden beds, and then we surround it with plants that are going to bring in the pollinators, support their veggie growing. So here we have xerochrysum, brachyscome, again, salvia that's in the planter, the billy buttons, and on this, you can sort of see a little bit of femida. So, you know, these gardens can be really still beautiful in such a small place, but then still encourage all of your pollinating insects. It's really surprising when you have these small gardens how much biodiversity you can get into this space. So when we have these smaller gardens, we just think a little bit smaller in the way that what plants we're going to choose for these areas. So we get dwarf varieties of everything. And some of the species that are really great for these smaller gardens are things like your crowias, smaller banksias. You can get dwarf corymbias, like you can see in this picture. Other dwarf trees, you know, we love our eucalyptus. I like eucalyptus, but a lot of people like eucalyptus. Eucalyptus orbifolia is only a 3 by 4 meter tree. Eucalyptus gregarsoniana. It's variable, but you can cut them at the base and you can get like just that smaller mallee-like tree. And the Indigofera australis, which I showed in a previous slide with these beautiful pink flowers, which are flowering now. It's a really lovely plant. And that used to be used amongst the Indigenous people to dye a lot of their garments. So, you know, it's a really nice celebration of plants that we used here before. This is another really small garden. It is literally only like 1.2 meters wide, but it just shows like what plant selection and what you can do. So we've done, she did say she wanted like a corymbia, she wanted it so bad, and we were like, God, it's a really small space, but we've gone for like a dwarf version. Another really lovely plant to use is the Myroporum floribundum, or we use the snowdrift variety, which is a type of gosh, I don't even know its common name. I don't know. I'm just going to call it Myroporum floribundum. But this tree is stunning. It's got like its common name. There's one called snowdrift, and the reason being is that it gets this profusion of flowers right on the tips of its leaves, and it looks like it's literally covered in snow. It's a very nice plant in small areas that get a bit of part shade. It is quite quick growing, so in these small environments, you find that it can be a little bit awkward in growth rate. So it does grow pretty quickly, but it tends to just grow to its surrounding. And because it's got quite a shallow root system, it's not that impactful. When we try and make the space feel really green, we always think about going vertical. And when we think about vines, a lot of vines are a bit top heavy, so they like to grow to the top. We like using this vine called gum vine, and the reason being is it keeps its leaf on at the base, and it's pretty even in its leaf growth. So yeah, love Hardenbergia, Violacea, but yeah, it tends to just sit on top and become this big mess and mass. So it's a little bit more maintenance. For fern types, ferns are particularly great in small gardens. Again, not too much root. Like it's more like a thicket of root mass, but they tend to just keep growing and growing and growing. Very easy to maintain. This one is a Pteris tremula, which is a local bracken fern, and yeah, it's a freaking fantastic plant in your corners. And yeah, I guess in this garden, you can see we've still put a fair bit of biodiversity in there, from ground covers to support, isopods, which is your slaters, and we used to call them like land fleas, but they're all like different species that help break down barks and increase that mycorrhizal fungi. We've got fern species in those sort of problematic areas with, low airflow and a lot of shade. Gum vine to be able to green up those walls. Bit of Dianella in there, and now we've got a little bit of fruit. The Crowia with those pretty pink flowers, and then the Myroporum to give us that really soft, feminine feel. And even in our pots, I know we've really jammed it in there, but it's been 2 years. We actually got some photos the other day of this garden. It's been 2 years and they're still going. She is supposed to get some little wicking beds put on the deck. She hasn't got to that stage yet, so she's going to transplant them out of this pot. But in this pot, we have Scaevola and Veronica and some kangaroo grass. So, these species can be really pretty, and they're still, going to attract all our pollinators in time. Bringing greenery indoors. This is a garden, and obviously we can see that there's the exotic vine here, but this is still habitat vines, and those walls are habitat, big habitat for so many species, for mammal species, for insect species, and frog species as well, but primarily probably spiders and things like that. But you can see here that we've got that diversity happening again, from little Banksias, Scaevolas. A lot of people don't realize that you can really trim Banksias really nicely. So that tree at the door is a Banksia, which we've given it a bit more character by trimming it all up. And yeah, I mean, it's a small space and it still offers so much biodiversity. And like I said, walls and vines are a really big thing to encourage a lot of the critters. Other plants like this small garden, it was just literally viola and little stepping logs for kids to be able to enjoy. And, we're helping here with lizard species, frog species, and insect species. It's very, very simple design to be able to look after all these critters. A big thing too is that we always try and bring in a good leaf litter, logs and rocks, which are really important for habitat. And as I've said before, just the diversity of those species. For rocks and logs in your garden, even if you do have planters or if it's just a small garden, we find that these are really, really important to have. I said before about the thermal qualities. So rocks will provide a thermal quality for providing moisture in summer months. It keeps it cooler in summer months, and in winter, it's warm in the winter months. So all your plants do really, really well around it, but they also become habitat to a range of different species. So, and they look really good. Like rocks can look really nice. You can turn them into a seat. They can be part of nature play for little kids. You know, I think they look great. And here, our local rock is basalt, so I always try and use basalt. If you have a little pond, we have a little pond at our place when we were renting. My partner literally dug like a meter wide pond, and it was incredible. We got little silver eyes come in. I put like little fish in there that have survived, little pygmy perch, and it's been doing so well. And what it encourages is just incredible. So it doesn't matter how big your yard is, you can still accommodate something. It's going to create that cooling, like humidity, and provide moisture to a lot of plants in the atmosphere and on the ground. It's a water soak. If you don't line it, it can become a water soak. You know, ponds are really, really important, as we all know, and it's obviously giving water source to a lot of animals. Other water sources to include is the bird baths, but if you want to encourage butterflies into your garden, when you use your water dishes, make sure you fill it with dirt, so then they can go in and drink that moisture, because they don't actually drink from normal water. It needs to have a dirt base so they can drink from that. Now going to small courtyards. This is a courtyard. It's a little internal one. It doesn't have any connection to the outside world. It's right in the middle of the whole house, and we still have a lot of insect species that have come in. We also, a funny story is that not this one, but in another place with a very similar situation, we had the lady call me up and she said, "Em, I have a turtle in my pond." And I was like, "What?" And they had a pet. It was a new turtle, little baby turtle. They had a pet turtle in the pond originally for their grandkid, but this small turtle was in there, and I just couldn't believe. I went in, and lo and behold, there was this small turtle, and it was a eastern long-necked turtle. They had a Murray short-necked turtle, and I was like, "Oh my God, how did this happen?" Anyway, what happened was a ibis from the parkland down near Strathmore had come in because they found it in their garden. It flew in, and this house that was there is like 3 stories high, and this is in the middle. So the birds come in, and it's obviously gone into the pond to try and hunt their goldfish, and it regurgitated the turtle into the pond. And so it's that thing of birds and all those sort of things where this is sometimes how animals can so happen to end up in your garden. But in this particular garden, you know, there is so many insects. It's not even funny. We have butterflies come in, you know, they find it. They must come over and they just sense it. There's a vibration that they're coming into, and they find these places. So it's really exciting. I just love it so much. So in this garden, we have Plectranthus, which is a really good plant for under trees in those real sticky situations. Viola heteracea, which is your native violet. Brachyscomes. For an exotic, these small pines are really, really great. You can go to conifer nurseries. They only grow like 10 centimeters every 10 years. They're a tiny little pine that literally is like bonsai in your garden forever. And then, you know, your small maples are really good for courtyards. I just saw that someone said, "What do you do to stop the extra mosquitoes as they lay eggs into your pond?" That's why I do put in the pygmy perch, which is a little native fish, because they will eat the mosquito larvae. Another way to stop mosquito larvae is if you do get like a little battery operated pump and disperse that top layer, that will help mitigate little larvae from being able to breed in there. So that usually a big help. There's another little courtyard garden. Again, going vertical is really, really important. This garden this is where we found the little family of geckos. So again, doesn't matter, this was internal, they find their way in, which is incredible. We also had birds coming in here as well. They obviously just go on the magnolia and then do their little thing. So this is a really sweet little spot. You can see it all from indoors. She has her herbs and veggies, but it still offers something to wildlife. So yeah, those really tricky spots, vertical gardens are pretty good. I use the Atlantis wall because they have little reservoir wicking system in the pots. Wicking systems are the best. They help all these plant species. I'm starting to feel like I'm going a little bit behind time, so I'm getting a bit faster here. So courtyards and nature play for these smaller spaces. Logs become nature play, but they also degrade and become really good habitat for a lot of these insect species. And when we're thinking about all of these spaces, just think of these six key points when you create a garden. So it's staging it. Remember that the existing plants are providing habitat if you have some in there, of course. So work with those plants and work around them because that's already something for habitat. Diversity, so trying to incorporate as many of those different species that I spoke about before, having things that produce fruit or nectar or seed is really important to have that diversity come into your garden. And balance, so when we think about balance, is what is that in terms of water and rocks and soil, and what is that aspect in your garden for sun, water. Nature's art, which is what we think of as rocks, boulders and logs. They're artistic in your garden, but they're also habitat. Leaf litter and ground covers are really important to just create that biodiversity that's happening underneath your soil, which can also be accommodated into your pots and planters in your small spaces. And advertise is through the use of obviously flowers, which are like, saying, hey, come to me, pollinate me. I've just added a few little things. These are just some silly little experiments I had. I got these really dumb egg pots that I didn't know what to do with it. So I buried them in the garden and then I got a pubble bonk. So, these things do become habitat in some way. So really experiment in your garden and put these things. So this is replicating the cracks and crevices in your garden to help this biodiversity. Lizard lounges and homes. We did this sort of stuff in primary schools, but you can do it, with your kids or your grandkids. These little logs and rocks, and do it in a display that could maybe look a little bit nicer than this one. Rocks and boulders, I said before how really great they are, but if you sort of find some really cool ones, you can get to depressions, which become also bird baths and ways to collect water naturally. Insect boxes, I know they're always a bit, they're done all the time, but they are really important and they can be a really great feature in your garden, especially for like pollinated areas and productive areas to try and encourage, spiders to keep pests down and things like that. I always like to bring up this topic on hollows because a lot of people are a bit like, oh, what? So only 17% of hollows are used by birds. 42% is use hollows are mammals, and 28% are reptiles. So the majority of the animals are mammals and reptiles that use hollows, not birds, which everyone thinks. And it does take 100 years for even the tiniest hollow to form, and 200 years for those larger hollows to form for things like kewl kookaburras and powerful owls. So this is where we're obviously in the infancy of putting trees back, but how important nesting boxes are and the diversity of nesting boxes to support wildlife. I touched before on mosquitoes, microbat. One microbat eats 600 mosquitoes a night. So if we can have microbats, they live in things like corrugated iron. They've really learnt to live in Melbourne, which is really great. So If you can bring in some microbat boxes, just go to La Trobe University and get some boxes there. Or you can create your own, which is literally like put corrugated iron on the side of a wall that's not facing west sun so they don't burn. There's a really good way. And some books that I recommend if you don't have. So the Plants of Western Melbourne, sorry, I've been talking too long. Plants of Melbourne's Western Plains. So there's only 0.1%, if not less than that, of our grasslands left. So all of Melbourne used to be basalt plain woodland. So if you have that book, look at some of the plants and try and incorporate that into your garden. This is the Bible of all landscape architects who, like native plants or, want to learn that flora of Melbourne. I like this book, Melbourne's Wildlife Guide. It's a bit hard to get, but it's a great little book for anyone looking at their wildlife. Habitat by AB, fantastic book. And other resources, you can buy these pretty easily. The Pollinator book. And please get onto like iNaturalist on these apps and the Frog ID app, and that will give you a little bit of a resource to be able to, look at what froggies are in your area and be a field scientist with iNaturalist and start, looking and documenting some of your data. I end my talk always, and I'm just 1 minute over, with a story of a bird I rescued called Muddy. There's no sound, I'm sorry, but Muddy was found on the middle of the road near Aldi on Dundas Street in Thornbury. And I looked after her and fed her, and then we used to take her to site and taught her how to eat again. And then it got to a point where I would just let her outside and I'd call for her, and I'd call her May Muddy, and she would fly down every day and like visit me and feed her. And I think what I'm trying to get at here is it's so nice to be able to do these small things in our gardens and our spaces to help wildlife, because we really are connected to all these species. And to do those small things is just, it's so much nicer than, obviously planting Nandina and not looking after anything. Like, we are so connected, and it's so rewarding to like see what comes into your garden by just doing small little invitations for these animals. So thank you for listening, guys, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Em. Lots of little love heart reacts, which are really sweet. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We do have one from earlier on, and I'm wondering whether you have any recommendations for some grevilleas that might work in pots.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of grevilleas. Oh my goodness. So a lot of people love the Grevillea petrophaloides, which is like the red hot pokers. I think that's the common name. Again, you got to go to Karanga for these. They're so good. This Grevillea has a small root system. It really likes pots because it likes free draining soil. And what it does is it sends off sort of like these fireworks of Grevillea flowers, like little sprays. Another really good one is the catkin Grevillea. It's a bit spiky, but it looks really good in a pot, and that's Grevillea sinacea, which is a really nice one. There's Grevillea polybracta is another really nice one. I like a few that I really like to use, but I would really look into the Grevillea petrophaloides. I think that was one that we had in one of the pictures before, and unfortunately it wasn't in flower, but that one is a cool one.
Excellent. James is wondering, do you have callistemon suggestions for a balcony? They've got a north facing and it's quite windy. And what sort of pot size would you recommend?
Callistemons. I mean, now I'm trying to think. I don't
Put you on
use
the spot, sorry.
callistemons. Yeah, no. I'm like, what's all the so callistemon varieties, citrina is a really good one. I would try and get a little bit bigger pot size for for those species, and just to be wary that they do seem really hardy, but I do find that they like a fair bit of water. So make sure you always have a pot at the base, or if it's a wicking system, because it does need a little bit more water. Obviously, we've got like the common callistemon, like the King's Park Special and things like that. They do okay. But what other species? I find too, like using the oh my god, I've gone into a lap. I've gotten too tired. I find
So
that if you're if you're going into pot plants and some other varieties that might be I don't know, really great. Camelasium Paddy's Pink is a really good plant to have in pots. I guess the question is, with the callistemon variety, are you using it more for like something really big and structural, or a screen, or is it used to just encourage like wildlife? Because I guess that's always like the questions to ask too.
mm,
I think it's just to be small by a woolly bush tree in the corner of a balcony.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Next
just think
door
they
woolly
look
bush.
great, but I'm not quite
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
I would go with, I would try the camelasium. I think because you can trim them up and make them look really pretty and bushy, and you get the pink flowers. Otherwise, that other species that are really good, I'd probably go like Tomasia. They're a really good plant. Another thing would be with woolly bush would be any of the Phebalium species. That's something I didn't cover. Phebalium's Phebalium, Phebalium. Again, go to Karanga. They'll have it. It's really good. I think those species might be a little bit better suited, because I find callistemons can sometimes grow a little bit too quick, and they don't necessarily like the pots. They want to get a little bit more spread of the root.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
thanks for
Um,
jumping in, James, too. It's nice
yeah, it's
to
good.
see and talk to someone.
No.
Yeah, you
Um,
kind of feel like no one's here.
I know.
Yeah.
Grace is wondering whether you have any suggestions for suppliers of some of the wicking pots and planters that you showed today.
Yeah. So the ones that you probably saw the ones you did see in the picture was the glow pear. Um, it is kind of hard with wicking. We end up tanking it ourselves and doing it. So we will seal up the holes, and we buy, like, you can either put scoria at the base, or you can buy a wicking cell from Atlantis, and you put that in the base. And you need to make sure that 100 mil up from the bottom of that tank that you put a little overflow pipe. And so then obviously it's not going to fill with too much water and drown all your plants. We find that works a little bit better. And yeah, but glow pear was those planters that we had in those original images, and they're a nice little planter. But yeah, we need more
Excellent.
wicking beds. They can be kind of expensive though, so sometimes it is easier to do it yourself.
Yep.
Yep.
Paul is wondering, do you have advice about soil for potted plants? I'm wondering if there's a good brand or mix, additives to use, etc.
Yeah. There's the BioGrow Balcony Light that they recommend if you want something that's just like there and done. And that's when you start to use those species that like the free draining soil. I do find that it can dry up quite easily. So yeah, again, make sure it's either wicking or you've got some sort of base. I sometimes make my own soil. So it'll be a mixture of, I get like a lawn soil, so like a sandy loam basically, then a potting mix, and then a bit of three-way soil. And that's a really good way. And a bit of perlite or scoria, just like mix it through so you do have a bit of oxygen exchange in the tubs. That's what we do. That's really our remedy. But yeah, the BioLite is pretty good. Yeah.
Cool. Another question, this one from Sonia. Any suggestions for small front garden space? It's about 1 to 1.5 meters wide only. A small tree or bush facing north and south. It's quite windy, looking to attract wattle birds. And they've got an old, this is amazing, 130-year-old neighbour's coastal banksia. Oh, it just went down. No, last
Oh,
Friday
that's
in the
sad.
wind. So I'm assuming it's something, I guess, to fill that space now.
To fill the Banksia space?
It sounds
Or,
like it.
yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Sonia.
Yeah. I mean, it is sad when you lose that because obviously animals will know that they've lost their Banksia. So unless you want to replace it with another Banksia, that's always something. If you didn't want something as big, there are Banksia varieties like your Sentinel, which is a smaller version, though sometimes I question how big they get. So they say they only get 2 meters, but I have seen them a little bit bigger. But it has advanced a bit more, so that's one you could do. Did you say it was north? What was the thing it said?
Yeah, north-south facing.
North-south facing. And sandy, I guess. Yeah. Oh God, it's getting that late of day. I would probably look at
For bigger birds, keen to attract.
Melaleuca. Yeah. Maybe like Melaleuca varieties. Did you say big? She wants big birds, like all your wattle birds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Melaleucas, maybe. It's just more if it's a really small space. I don't know how big the space is. I always question like what those roots can do because you do have to be a little bit mindful of that as a landscape architect. You're like, oh, I don't want to damage too much. But if the Banksia was there, yeah, you could look at Melaleucas. Again, they like the sandy environment. You do want to give them a little bit of water to get them established, but you will get, I don't know, those birds be able to come back through. But yeah, I'd probably look at, other Banksias as well, I probably would say. And then at the base, you can do all your Chrysocephalums and your Carbobrotus. You've got Valias. There are so many different species you can put at the bottom, but I would definitely visit your local nursery and see what they have there too. But yeah.
Excellent. Let me just catch up with where I was. Any indigenous native plants that are also edible that might work in pots?
Yeah, so that was when I said, like, your chocolate lilies, your Bowman lilies, Dialnella, Ostromyrtus, the salt, like the Encolina saltbush, though I don't really like the taste of them. You can do, if you want like a little bit of a vine behind it, you can go for like the appleberries, the Ballardias. What else is there? Coprosma. Oh, Coprosma is a little bit. It's really good for little birds. Coprosma quadrifolia. It's a currant, blackcurrant bush, but you can kind of trim it and try and form it. It'd be very interesting. I haven't done it yet, but I have always thought of it. And what other fruiting species? There's a Pittosporum angustifolium, which is a really nice one to use, which might be really nice. And acacia species, don't forget your acacias can be ground up for, you can use the seed in cakes and things like that. But make sure you check which acacia it is because the acacias can be toxic, especially the blue leaf.
Do your own research, everyone.
You have to do research always, never, always question anything that everyone says. So
be super confident with your ID skills. Bernadette is saying, hi, Em. Apologies, I missed the start. Looking to attract lots of little birds and ideally discourage massive amounts of noisy miners that have taken over. So good plants for little birds.
Always your spikier bushes, of course. So Grevillea rosmifolia, Melicitus dentatus. It's I don't know its common name. I'm sorry, I'm speaking Latin. You got Acacia paradoxia, the prickly Moses, the Indigofera australis, that again, Asaria spinulosa, Alaria species. So a lot of them like Alaria ramulosa, Alaria ramulata. Lot of Goudia lotifolia is also a really good one. And any shrub mass. So like correas are always fantastic. You've got so many different species of correa that you can use. And Westringia is also a really good one. If you can create that density, then the small birds will find that, really like a habitat that they can go into. Another one that a lot of people love, and it's a pretty common one that you can find, Banksia birdsong, Banksia spinulosa. Very dense, you still get like those flowers. And in reference to the lady who said that she wanted to replace a tree, maybe Banksia spinulosa would be a better recommendation because it probably won't get as high and it won't get caught by the wind. It's more of a bushier peel, and you get those small birds that come in. So there's some species that you can use.
And I think you mentioned at the start around like some of the minor birds that they prefer to not have like they don't like bushier gardens. Was that right? And to plant quite densely?
Yeah, so they love open space because basically the way I see it is they're bullies. So if the bully can see you, they're going to bully you. And so you got to make it so they can hide. So yeah, you never see these species in really dense forested areas. So all that shrub mass is really, really important. And yeah, that's why you always see them at ovals or open parklands and things like that. Yeah. So
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just going to say,
no.
Bernadette, we also recorded the session, so you'll be able to go back and watch the start if you like. This is a great question from Grace. So in relation to the wicking beds, obviously the soil stays more moist. Is this an issue for plants that like free draining soils like you were talking about earlier?
A lot of those plants, like it's not that there's going to be an excessive amount of moisture. It's if they can tap into that system. So we find that all of those plant species love the wicking system. They thrive better. I guess those species are waiting for that downpour of rain to be able to tap into something. So the soil is still free draining, but they're also able to tap into water. And the warmth of the actual bed makes it even better for them. So it doesn't have any problem that way. It's only if the water itself is hitting the soil level and making it so saturated that it makes the soil like anaerobic or whatever. So yeah, it's still free draining. It's just they're getting more water, and in that application they perform better. It's that thing of, everyone says, oh, I don't like native plants, they look scraggy, or I'm going to use native plants because I don't want to do maintenance. The thing is, if you use native plants and you give them love, if you give them water, if you trim them and give them their right native food or fertilizer, they end up being a beautiful plant more than, like you almost think, like people say, oh, it's an exotic garden. It's not, it's a native garden because it's been loved. So yeah.
Great advice. Christina is wondering about planting for ringtail possums. So maybe like, I'm assuming because they're traveling through the courtyard. Christina, again, feel free to jump in. Maybe you mean you want them to stay, potentially?
I could.
Oh, sorry, I'm trying to check in. Yeah, I mean, I just love that we hear them coming through. They travel over our roof most nights, and we hear them, and sometimes see them out in the trees through the upstairs window. And yeah, just want to encourage them, I guess.
Yeah. I got a really cute story. So there's a lady who we've done a garden for, and we installed the shipping route through the garden, and now they use that to be able to get through the property. And she has like a tree house, so it's all connected, so they can go through there. But this kind of happened, we didn't mean for it to happen, but we brought in a tree mulch the council had mulched up, and it was free and it was great because we love tree mulch because it's got diversity of species. So what happened was there was a lot of seed from the kangaroo apple tree, Solanum. And this bush is a really quick growing bush, and it's very it produces those little red apple-y type things. Don't eat them when they're green. They're very poisonous, but when they're ripe, they're delicious. So possums love them. this one day there was they had popped up everywhere and it had little ringtails in there, and this one was in the bush, but it looked like it was sort of like feeling itself downstairs. And Carol was like, is it doing, like, what's it doing? And then she was looking, and it's got one hand and it's eating the kangaroo apples, and then the other hand's touching itself downstairs. And then when she looked closer, she realized it was its little Joey trying to get out and eat the same thing. And because she was like enjoying the carrot, she was pushing her back into the pouch so she could still keep enjoying the food. It was really sweet. It's very nice to hear someone who wants to keep ringtails, because a lot of people always ask me to get rid of them. Makes me very sad. But yeah, kangaroo apples are a really good food source for them. They do like a lot of the Banksia varieties, but they can bring these in particular big defoliators. So it is really nice to like plant things like the kangaroo apples, where it gets them to be able to have a food source, so they kind of don't rely on eating all the other plants around the area. Because the most common thing is when people say that they've destroyed their plant is usually because they're the only one on the street that has the plants that it can eat, is usually the general rule. So yeah, I would create like little rope courses so they can pass through. I'd probably plant a few plants that they'd like to eat. Yeah, see, I've got one here. Possums have decimated our garden, Belgrave. Yeah. And there's the other thing too, is that like ringtails love exotic plants as well, and it's caused the numbers to really obviously go out of control in certain areas. Belgrave would definitely be one of them. And it's that thing of like hierarchy and adaptation of these animal species that have learnt to live with us. So some of them have really learnt to survive so well with us. They're like, humans are funny creatures. They just keep making us more food and we're going to survive and thrive. So I guess there's that thing of like hierarchy is about what naturally predates on these animals. So if you're in Belgrave and those sort of areas, what can you do? Is it like, can you look into putting in powerful owl boxes, or all those sort of things? Is there something where you can have different types of owls, or open areas? So they've killed your maple grapevines. Yeah, so all of those species are really lovely and edible. So there's not really much I can say that you can do to prevent them from doing that, other than giving them alternative food sources. But sometimes they tend to take a liking to especially like maples and things, because there's a lot more nutritional value in them. Yeah, can't really answer any more of that for Keith and Sarah, I'm sorry.
Thanks again, Christina, for jumping in. Yeah, if there's any other questions, feel free to pop them in. We've got a few more minutes before we have to wrap up. But before we do that, I just want to say, thanks again so much for your presentation. It's just so inspiring, beautiful photos, like amazing gardens that you've created and worked on. And yeah, some really excellent advice. For everyone who's joining us, yeah, if you haven't come across My Smart Garden before, we run a bunch of free in-person and online events. There's things popping up all the time, so you can either subscribe to our newsletter or check out our website, and we're on Instagram and Facebook as well, so you can follow us there. But yeah, it doesn't look like there's any more questions at this point in time, unless you're really super quick typing. We might leave it there.
I do want to say though that My Smart Garden is really fantastic. Like you guys have done such a good job, and you run so many great sessions of so many different people. So yeah, thank you, Beck.
Thank you so much.
Nice that people are following you guys too.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is, as soon as this finishes, you will all be sent a really short survey as well. So we love to hear everyone's feedback, and it's also great for some of our reporting, which goes up the chain to our management. So if you've got a couple of minutes at the end of this session, we'd love to hear your feedback. But yeah, otherwise, have a great night. Oh, sorry, I've just seen a question. Our Instagram is just My Smart Garden. I can probably find the link and post it. in the chat for you.
Is Bern there? And Pia, I see you there, Pia. Sorry, I can see some faces I know.
Oh, excellent.
Hi, Pia.
It's always
Hi,
nice.
is it bird? Real bird? Like the bird? I don't know. This is nice. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
guys for listening. It was really, it's really nice to see, people wanting to do their thing in their backyards and obviously learning things to apply for other people too. So spread the word and it's great. It's fun.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.